About 5 years ago, I noticed that there were three major things that were happening in our lifetime that haven't happened before. And I learned through the surprises that many of the times that I was surprised is because things didn't happen in my lifetime. Those three basic things were the amount of printing of money and the creation of debt and what that means for inflation of the value of money. The second was the amount of internal conflict. So we pay attention to these things. In other words, gaps in wealth and opportunity and values leading to populism. Populism are populace of people who will fight and win at all costs, and that causes a threat to democracy and a threat to solving some of these problems. And the third thing is international conflict. In other words, the rise and challenging of great powers. And so I studied the history of those over the last 500 years, and I watched those patterns.
And if you take that, the situation, are the policies that we are putting in place now the right ones? And I don't necessarily mean it right raising interest rates per se. We'll talk about that in the next panel. But are they the right policies for structural growth around the world?
There are basics, very common sense basics, right? You can't spend more money than you earn without creating debt. So when the government does that, it has to create debt. It sells that to investors. So there's a supply demand. If you don't pay a high enough interest rate, they don't want to hold it. And as a result, debt is buying power. When you put debt and money into the system, you hype it up. But debt also creates an obligation to pay back. And when there's too much debt, then there is how do you pay back? Do you give it in the same hard value, or do you print money? So throughout history, when this has occurred, you can go back to the Old Testament, you see the situation that we're in. That's fundamentally, you can only raise your living standards by being productive.
So
we have a basic fundamental problem there.
But it's a problem of what? Lowering living standards, increased poverty, populism, of the range of problems. Which ones bothering you the most at the moment? And we'll just let your mic be reset.
Productivity. We're creating unsound finances because we print a lot more money. We want to spend more money than we have. It's like a human being. Same for a government. The only difference between a government and a human being is they print money. So when you think about how much money do you have? So now productivity. If you invest in productivity, we were hearing this before. If you invest in education and you create higher education, they're very clear indicators of what makes living standards rise. The foremost, is do you raise children ideally in a family that has two parents who care about them, and that they go to school, a good school, and they get well educated, and they are civil, and they come out to a world of equal opportunity, and then maybe enough resources that when they have great ideas, it's financed, and you have peace, you have prosperity. Those are the only things you need. So investing in those things is the way of the future. We're involved in philanthropy, and we see that you can make such big differences economically.
As we are about to face a recession, and we can argue and debate whether it's a global recession, a developed world recession, it doesn't really matter. There's going to be hard economic times ahead. What do you worry about with that?
I worry about how we are with each other, most fundamentally, right? Problems always exist. But in this world in which there's great domestic conflict and there's great international conflict because of these differences, history has shown these patterns. It happens over and over again. Internationally, there are 5 types of war. There's a trade war, a technology war, a geopolitical influence war, a capital and economic war, and a military war.
We've got them all.
Well, yes, and the ways that they change. You could see before, when you use economic warfare and capital warfare, and it accelerates, such as you cut off countries from receiving needed things. When all that happens and you see an increase in military spending, you're close to the point of another military war, and you have financial problems. So as I watch that, yeah, it comes down to how people are with each other and dealing with that.
Are today's leaders up to it? We saw in the UK, clearly, the former Prime Minister, she will be today, wasn't. But if you look globally now, are you encouraged, discouraged, worried? Today's leaders?
We have a situation in which who is chosen as leaders in democracy is a function of these groups of people who say, you must fight for me. So you get populists of both sides. So, and almost leaders cannot lead. They cannot do the strong changes without somebody agreeing. We're arguing over everything. And so when we look at how is a possibility of lead, story about Mario Draghi and the existing primary system in the United States choosing candidates. So I don't think you're going to find, and history has shown, that it increases. They say you have to pick a side, okay? And so you pick a side increasingly, whether it's domestically or internationally. You will be asked to pick a side and that conflict. That doesn't lend itself to compromise. It doesn't lend itself to thinking about the whole. So I'm concerned about that.
We're going to go to the panel, the big board, in a moment. What's the one thing this board needs to address? Because in all of these cases, there is the issues du jour, and then there are the longer term issues. So when we sit down on bank, what do you want to hear discussed?
I want to hear, first of all, how the system is reformed so that the all-in desires of what we want, such as if we're doing climate, if we're doing education, and so on, how the system is economically reformed so that there are costs and benefits that are built into it. Under the existing profit system, the costs of pollution aren't there, the cost of bad education. So there literally has to be structural changes so that you achieve the things you want. What do you want? You want peace, civility, and you want equality of
Is that realistic?
It is realistic if we can behave well with each other. We have in the world, in total, the highest income practically that we've ever had. We have the greatest life expectancy. Our circumstances have never been greater. It's an engineering exercise. If you have people who are good with each other and can think of the whole, and how do you engineer for the whole, the capacity of that to exists. We have a problem though, because we have these conflicts.